They said she was nothing, a dirt-smudged girl who hauled flowers through servants' gates, invisible to the people she served. But when the most powerful woman in the realm cornered her with an impossible offer, marry my son, save your family, survive 3 months in a world built to destroy you, Liora Hale didn't flinch. She looked the Dowager Duchess dead in the eye and said yes. What happened next shook the entire aristocracy to its core. This is the story of a girl who refused to disappear. Stay until the end to see how she rewrote every rule they thought was unbreakable. Drop a comment with your city and hit that like button. Let's begin. The morning Liora's life changed forever started like every other morning in the past 2 years, cold, brutal, and unforgiving. She woke before dawn in a room so small her elbows brushed both walls when she stretched. The ceiling slanted at an angle that made standing upright impossible on one side, and the floorboards creaked so loud she'd learned to step only on specific spots to avoid waking her younger siblings. Mara and Tobin slept curled together on the only other mattress, their breath making small clouds in the freezing air. Liora didn't bother lighting a candle. She'd done this routine so many times she could navigate it blind. She pulled on 2 layers of stockings, both darned in multiple places, then the same brown dress she wore every day. It had been her mother's once. Now the hem was mud-stained and the cuffs were frayed, but it was sturdy, and in Liora's world, sturdy mattered more than pretty. From the next room she heard her father cough. Not the normal morning clearing of the throat, but the wet, rattling hack that had been getting worse for months. Each cough sounded like something breaking inside him. She paused, hand on the door frame, listening, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. "Papa?" she called softly. "I'm fine." His voice was rough as gravel. "Go on, you'll be late." Liora bit her lip. She wanted to argue, to insist he see a physician again, but they'd had this fight 100 times. Physicians cost money they didn't have. Medicine cost money they didn't have. Everything cost money they didn't have. And the debt kept growing like a living thing, swallowing every coin she managed to scrape together. She grabbed the delivery basket from its hook by the door. It was already packed from the night before. 12 bouquets wrapped in simple brown paper, arranged by size and destination. Roses for the mayor's wife, lilies for the magistrate's daughter's wedding, wildflowers for old Mrs. Chen, who always tipped an extra copper even though Liora knew she couldn't afford it. And then there was the last delivery, the one that made her stomach twist every single time. The Drake estate. Liora stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness, pulling her threadbare shawl tight around her shoulders. The village of Thornhaven was barely stirring. A few shopkeepers were opening their shutters, and the blacksmith's forge already glowed orange in the distance, but most people were still asleep in their warm beds. Not that Liora resented them for it. Much. She walked quickly, her boots crunching on the frost-hardened dirt road. The basket wasn't heavy yet, but it would be by the time she finished. Her route took her through the lower village first, the cluster of cottages and shops where people like her lived. People who worked with their hands. People who were one bad harvest, one illness, one stroke of bad luck away from losing everything. People who were invisible to the ones living up on the hill. The Drake estate sat at the highest point in the county, a sprawling Gothic mansion of gray stone that looked like it had been carved out of the mountain itself. Even from a distance, it dominated the landscape. Towers and turrets, manicured gardens that took a staff of 20 to maintain, walls so high you couldn't see over them unless you climbed a tree. Liora had delivered flowers there twice a week for 2 years, and she'd never once been invited through the front door. Servants' entrance only. Always. She made her other deliveries first, exchanging polite nods and occasional small talk with the housekeepers and maids who answered the doors. Everyone knew everyone in Thornhaven. Everyone knew Liora's father had been the finest florist in 3 counties before his lungs started failing. Everyone knew the Hale family was drowning in medical debt, and everyone pretended not to notice. By the time Liora reached the base of the hill leading to the Drake estate, the sun was just starting to bleed orange across the horizon. She paused to catch her breath, switching the basket to her other arm. The final bouquet was the largest, 24 white roses arranged with eucalyptus and baby's breath, tied with an ivory ribbon that had cost more than Liora earned in a week. The Dowager Duchess ordered fresh flowers every 3 days. Always white. Always roses, always perfect. Liora started up the hill. Her thighs burned. Her fingers ached from the cold. But she kept her pace steady, her chin up. The trick to surviving this life, she'd learned, was to never let them see you struggling. The moment you looked weak, you became a target. The servants' gate was around the back, past the stables and the kitchen gardens. Liora had walked this path so many times she could do it in her sleep. She rang the bell and waited, shifting her weight from foot to stay warm. The door opened. Mrs. Grimsby, the head housekeeper, stood there with her usual expression of vague disapproval. "You're late," she said. Liora glanced at the sky. The sun's barely up. The Duchess expects her flowers at dawn. Dawn was 7 minutes ago. "My apologies," Liora said flatly, holding out the basket. "It won't happen again." Mrs. Grimsby took the flowers without a word of thanks, inspecting them with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for hunting for rat droppings in the grain. She turned the bouquet this way and that, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "These will do," she finally declared, as if she were granting a royal pardon. Liora waited. This was the part where Mrs. Grimsby was supposed to hand over the payment, 6 silver coins, the same as always. But Mrs. Grimsby just stood there, flowers in hand, staring at Liora like she was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "The Duchess would like to see you," she said. Leora's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry." "What?" "You heard me. Follow me." "But there must be some mistake. I just deliver the flowers. I don't—" "Are you arguing with a direct order from the Dowager Duchess?" Mrs. Grimsby's voice could have frozen water. "No, ma'am." "Then follow, and for heaven's sake, wipe your feet." Leora's heart hammered as she followed the housekeeper through a maze of corridors she'd never seen before. This wasn't the servants' area, this was the main house, the real house. Polished marble floors, oil paintings in gilded frames, chandeliers that probably cost more than her entire cottage. She caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror as they passed and nearly flinched. Mud on her hem, hair escaping from her braid, face pale and smudged with dirt. She looked exactly like what she was, a poor girl who didn't belong. Mrs. Grimsby stopped in front of a set of double doors, knocked twice, and pushed them open without waiting for an answer. "The florist's daughter, Your Grace," she announced, then stepped aside. Liora had no choice but to walk in. The room was a study, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth, and seated behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany was the Dowager Duchess Marguerite Drake. She was 70 if she was a day, but age hadn't softened her. She sat ramrod straight, dressed in black silk, her silver hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch the skin of her face. Her eyes were the color of slate, and when they landed on Liora, it felt like being pinned by a hawk. "Come closer," the Duchess said. Her voice was clipped, aristocratic, the kind of accent that came from generations of wealth and power. Liora stepped forward on shaking legs. "Your Grace, Stop." The Duchess held up one hand. "I did not ask you to speak. I asked you to come closer so I can see you properly." Leora's mouth snapped shut. She moved until she was standing directly in front of the desk, hands clasped in front of her to keep them from trembling. The Duchess studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Her gaze traveled from Leora's scuffed boots to her worn dress to her wind-burned face. It was the kind of look that catalogued every flaw, every weakness, every crack in the armor. Finally, she spoke. "How old are you?" 22, Your Grace." "Educated?" "I can read and write. Basic arithmetic." "Family?" "My father, 2 younger siblings. My mother passed when I was 16. "And your father is ill, I understand. Lung disease?" Leora's throat tightened. How did she know that? "Yes, Your Grace." "How much debt are you carrying?" The question hit like a slap. Leora's cheeks burned. "I don't see how that's—" 300 silver marks, the Duchess said calmly. "Give or take. Medical expenses, mostly. Some borrowed from the moneylender in town at an interest rate that should be criminal. You work 7 days a week and still fall further behind every month. Am I wrong?" Liora couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This woman, this stranger, knew everything, had probably known for weeks, maybe months. "Why am I here?" Liora managed to ask. The Duchess leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Because you have something I need, and I have something you need, I am going to propose a transaction. I don't understand. You will. The Duchess paused, as if choosing her next words very carefully. Tell me, Miss Hale, what do you know about my son? Liora blinked. The Duke? I have only one son, so yes, the Duke. Everyone in Thornhaven knew of Duke Cassian Drake. He was 30 years old, a war hero, and by all accounts, one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. He'd inherited the title at 25 when his father died, and in the 5 years since, he'd turned the Drake Holdings into an empire, ruthless in business, cold in manner. Unmarried, despite a parade of noble daughters being thrown at him every season. I know he's well respected, Liora said carefully. The Duchess's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. Diplomatic. I appreciate that. The truth is, my son is brilliant, capable, and utterly impossible. He has refused every marriage proposal, rebuffed every eligible woman, and made it abundantly clear he has no interest in producing an heir. This is a problem. I'm sure it is, Your Grace, but I don't see what this has to do with, I need him married, for political reasons I won't bore you with, and he needs incentive. The Duchess tilted her head. This is where you come in. Leora's brain was struggling to catch up. Me? I'm going to offer you a deal, Miss Hale. Listen carefully, because I will not repeat it. The Duchess's voice dropped, quiet and dangerous. You will move into this estate. You will dress, speak, and behave as a noblewoman. And you will pretend to be engaged to my son for exactly 3 months. The room spun. Liora actually had to put a hand on the desk to steady herself. That's insane. That's the offer. Why would anyone believe? People would know I'm not. People believe what they're told to believe. I will handle society. You will handle Cassian. But why me? I'm nobody. Precisely. The Duchess stood, crossing to the window. Every eligible woman in this kingdom wants to marry my son for his title, his wealth, his power. He sees through them all. But you... She turned back, and for the first time, something almost like approval flickered in her eyes. You don't want anything from him. You're not impressed by him. In fact, I'd wager you've never even thought about him at all. That's true, Liora admitted. That makes you unique. And uniqueness, Miss Hale, is valuable. The Duchess returned to her desk, pulling out a piece of parchment. If you agree, I will clear your family's debts. All of them. I will move your father to the estate physician's care. I will provide for your siblings' education. And at the end of 3 months, you will walk away with enough money to start fresh wherever you choose. Leora's hands were shaking. And if I say no, then you walk out that door and life continues exactly as it is. Debt, illness, struggle, until something breaks. The Duchess picked up a quill, dipping it in ink. I am offering you a way out. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. Brave. What a word for it. This wasn't bravery. This was desperation dressed up in fancy clothes. But Liora thought of her father's cough, of Mara needing new shoes, of Tobin asking when they could afford meat again. She thought of the moneylender's last visit, the way he'd looked at their cottage like he was already calculating its value. She thought of the weight she'd been carrying for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. What does the Duke think of this plan? She asked quietly. The Duchess smiled. It was not a kind smile. He doesn't know yet. That's part of the fun. You're going to blindside your own son? I'm going to save my stubborn son from himself. There's a difference. She held out the quill. Do we have an agreement? Liora stared at the parchment, at the quill, at the woman who held her family's entire future in her perfectly manicured hands. Every logical part of her brain screamed to run. This was madness. This was a trap. This was going to end in disaster. But the desperate part of her brain, the part that had been drowning for 2 years, whispered something different. What if it works? Liora took the quill. Her hand shook as she signed her name in careful, neat letters at the bottom of the page. The Duchess watched her with those hawk eyes, and when Liora set the quill down, she nodded once. Excellent. Mrs. Grimsby will show you to your new quarters. Someone will fetch your belongings from your cottage this afternoon. Your family will be informed you've taken a position here. They'll have questions. Tell them you're working as a lady's companion. It's not entirely untrue. The Duchess rang a small bell on her desk. One more thing, Miss Hale. My son returns from London tonight. You will meet him at dinner. I suggest you prepare yourself. Prepare myself how? The Duchess's smile was sharp as a blade. Cassian does not lose gracefully, and he's about to lose control of his own engagement. It should be quite entertaining. Mrs. Grimsby appeared in the doorway, and Liora was ushered out before she could process what had just happened. She'd agreed to fake an engagement to a man she'd never met, a man who was reportedly cold, ruthless, and completely uninterested in marriage, a man who was about to find out his mother had trapped him in a deal he never agreed to. Liora followed Mrs. Grimsby up a grand staircase, down another hallway, and into a bedroom that was larger than her entire cottage. A four-poster bed, a wardrobe, a window overlooking the gardens. Someone will bring you appropriate clothing, Mrs. Grimsby said stiffly. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late. The door closed. Liora stood alone in the middle of the room, her heart pounding, her mind racing. What had she just done? The afternoon passed in a blur of activity that felt like being caught in a storm. 3 maids descended on Leora's room with armfuls of fabric, chattering in quick, clipped voices about measurements and hemlines and absolutely no dear, that neckline won't do. A dressmaker arrived, a tiny woman with pins clenched between her teeth and eyes that could calculate a waist measurement from across a room. She circled Liora like a hawk, tutting and muttering about unrefined proportions, and at least the bone structure is decent. Liora stood on a stool in her undergarments, arms outstretched, trying not to flinch every time a pin got too close to skin. Have you ever worn a proper corset? One of the maids asked. No. The women exchanged glances. One of them actually sighed. 2 hours later, Liora understood why. The corset was a torture device masquerading as undergarment. It squeezed her ribs, pushed her breasts up to her chin, and made breathing feel like a competitive sport. I can't. This is too tight. That's how it's supposed to fit, dear, the dressmaker said without sympathy. Beauty is pain. You'll adjust. They laced her into a gown of deep emerald silk, to bring out your eyes, the Duchess specified, and pinned her hair up in a style that required so many hairpins Leora's scalp ached. Someone clasped a pearl necklace around her throat. Someone else slipped soft kidskin slippers onto her feet. When they finally stepped back, admiring their work, Liora barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like a lady, like someone who belonged in this house, like a liar. Perfect, the headmaid declared. Her Grace will be pleased. They left her alone with 20 minutes until dinner. Liora sat carefully on the edge of the bed, afraid to wrinkle the dress, and tried to breathe. This was insane. Completely insane. She was a florist's daughter who could barely afford bread, and in less than an hour, she was supposed to sit across from a duke and convince him, and everyone else, that they were engaged. Her stomach churned. She pressed a hand to her corseted ribs and focused on not vomiting on the expensive silk. A knock at the door made her jump. Miss Hale, Mrs. Grimsby's voice. It's time. Liora stood, smoothed her skirts, and followed the housekeeper down the hallway. They descended the grand staircase and walked through corridors that smelled of beeswax and old money until they reached a set of ornate dining room doors. Mrs. Grimsby pushed them open. The dining room was enormous, a table that could seat 20. Crystal chandeliers, paintings of stern-faced ancestors glaring down from the walls. And at the far end of the table, the Dowager Duchess sat in her black silk, a glass of wine in her hand, looking like a general surveying a battlefield. Ah, Miss Hale, punctual. I appreciate that. The Duchess gestured to a chair on her right. Sit. Cassian will join us shortly. Liora sat, her back ramrod straight, hands folded in her lap. A servant appeared and filled her wine glass. Another placed a plate in front of her, the first course, something that looked like seafood in a cream sauce. She had no idea which fork to use. The Duchess noticed. Start from the outside and work your way in, she said quietly, And for heaven's sake, don't gulp your wine. Sip. Liora picked up the correct fork with trembling fingers. They sat in tense silence for exactly 4 minutes before the doors opened again, and Duke Cassian Drake walked in. Leora's first thought was that he looked nothing like she'd imagined. She'd pictured someone older, softer, maybe with her father's kind eyes or the gentle demeanor of the village priest. Cassian Drake was none of those things. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from actual labor, not sitting behind a desk. Broad shoulders, strong hands, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, and eyes the color of winter steel, sharp and cold, and currently fixed on his mother with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Mother," he said, his voice low and even, "I received your note. Care to explain why I was summoned home 3 days early?" The Duchess smiled. "I have wonderful news. You're engaged." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cassian's gaze shifted to Liora, really looked at her for the first time. His expression didn't change. No surprise, no anger, nothing. Just that cold, assessing stare that made her feel like a specimen under glass. "I see," he said slowly. "And who exactly am I engaged to?" "Miss Liora Hale. She's been delivering our flowers for the past 2 years. Lovely girl, very hard-working." Cassian pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down with deliberate calm. A servant rushed to fill his wine glass. He picked it up, took a slow sip, and set it down with precision. "Let me make sure I understand," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have decided, without consulting me, that I am engaged to a woman I have never met. A woman who, if I'm not mistaken, is a commoner with no title, no estate, and no political connections. Have I missed anything?" "She's sitting right there," the Duchess said mildly. "Perhaps direct your questions to her." Those steel eyes landed on Liora again. She forced herself not to look away. "Did you agree to this?" he asked. Leora's throat was dry. "Yes." "Why?" "Because your mother offered to clear my family's debts in exchange for 3 months of my time." Something flickered across his face. Respect, maybe, or surprise that she'd answered honestly. "So this is a business arrangement," he said. "Yes. And you understand that this is a spectacularly stupid plan that will end with your reputation destroyed and my political standing compromised." "I understood it was risky when I agreed." "Risky?" He almost laughed. "That's one word for it." The Duchess cut into her food with surgical precision. "Cassian, darling, you're being dramatic. This is perfectly manageable. We announce the engagement tomorrow. Society will be shocked, of course, but I'll spin it as a love match. Star-crossed romance. Duke falls for the humble flower girl. People eat that nonsense up. And in 3 months, when it ends?" Cassian's jaw was tight. "What then?" "Then you'll have bought yourself time to find a real match, and I'll have silenced the vultures circling this family's legacy." The Duchess took a sip of wine. "Unless, of course, you'd like to explain to the House of Lords why the Drake line is about to die out, because you're too stubborn to marry." Cassian's knuckles went white around his fork. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Finally, he turned to Liora. "You really think you can do this? Pretend to be in love with me? Convince an entire aristocracy that you belong?" Liora met his eyes. "I've been pretending to be fine while my family starves for 2 years. I think I can manage 3 months of pretending to like you." The Duchess choked on her wine. Cassian blinked, clearly caught off guard. Then, to Leora's shock, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Well," he said quietly, "at least you're honest." He picked up his wine glass and raised it slightly. "To my lovely new fiancée, may we both survive this disaster with our sanity intact." Liora raised her own glass, her hand steadier than she expected. "To survival." They drank. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. There was no going back now. The announcement hit Thornhaven society like a cannonball through a cathedral window. By noon the next day, every drawing room, every shop, every street corner buzzed with the same scandalized whispers. The Duke, their Duke, The untouchable Cassian Drakey was engaged. To a commoner. To a girl who delivered flowers. Liora heard about it secondhand from one of the maids while being laced into yet another corset that felt like it was designed to punish her for breathing. "They're saying you must have seduced him," the maid whispered, eyes wide with gossip. "That you used some kind of, love potion or something." "There's no such thing as love potions," Liora said through gritted teeth. "Well, they're saying it anyway. Mrs. Patterson from the milliner's shop fainted when she heard. Just straight collapsed." Liora closed her eyes. Of course they were. What else would they say? That the Duke had fallen madly in love with a nobody? That this was anything other than a disaster waiting to happen? The maid finished the laces and stepped back. "There. You look lovely, miss. Truly." Liora looked at herself in the mirror. Another silk gown, this one pale blue with delicate embroidery at the collar. Her hair was pinned up again, though a few stubborn curls had already escaped. She looked like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Which, she supposed, she was. A sharp knock at the door made both of them jump. "Miss Hale," Mrs. Grimsby's voice, as warm as a midwinter frost. "His Grace requests your presence in the library, immediately." The maid's eyes went even wider. She mouthed good luck and scurried out. Liora took a breath, smoothed her skirts, and followed the housekeeper through the maze of hallways. Her new shoes, soft leather, fitted perfectly, made almost no sound on the marble floors. She missed her old boots. At least those had made her feel grounded. The library was on the second floor, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and windows that overlooked the gardens. Cassian stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the grounds like they'd personally offended him. "You wanted to see me?" Liora said. He turned. In daylight, he looked even more intimidating. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, and those eyes, still cold, still assessing, still making her feel like he could see straight through every lie she'd ever told. "Close the door," he said. She did. "We need to establish ground rules," he continued without preamble. "If we're going to survive the next 3 months without destroying each other, or ourselves, we need to be clear about expectations." "Fine. First, in public, you will act as though you are madly in love with me. Smiles, touches, whatever it takes to sell this farce. I don't care if you find me repulsive. You will perform." "Understood." "Second, in private, you will stay out of my way. I have estates to run, business to manage, and absolutely no interest in playing house with a stranger. We are not friends. We are not confidants. We are business partners in a temporary arrangement." Each word landed like a slap. Liora kept her face blank. "Anything else?" "Yes. Do not embarrass me. I don't care if you've never attended a ball or used a fish fork or curtsied to a countess. Learn, adapt, fast. Because the moment you stumble, every vulture in this kingdom will descend, and I will not protect you from consequences you brought on yourself." Liora's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Are you finished?" "For now." "Good. Then let me be clear about my expectations." She stepped closer, lifting her chin to meet his gaze. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't wake up one morning dreaming of being your fake fiancé. Your mother made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I took it because my family is drowning and I had no other choice. So don't stand there acting like I'm some gold-digging opportunist who trapped you. We're both trapped. The difference is, I'm honest about it." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. "You've got spine," he said quietly. "I'll give you that." "I've got survival instinct. There's a difference." "Is there?" They stared at each other for a long moment. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Finally, Cassian exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "My mother is hosting a garden party this weekend. 200 guests. Half the aristocracy will be there, all of them dying to get a look at you. That gives us 4 days to make you presentable." "I'm already presentable." "You're wearing the clothes. That's not the same thing." He crossed to a shelf and pulled down a thick leather-bound book. "This is Debrett's Peerage. You need to memorize every family name, title, and connection in the top 50 houses by Saturday." He dropped the book into her hands. It weighed about as much as a small child. You're joking. I don't joke. You also need etiquette training, dance lessons, and a crash course in current politics. I've arranged for Lady Pemberton to serve as your tutor. She'll be here this afternoon. Who's Lady Pemberton? A woman who's made a career out of turning country girls into duchesses. If anyone can pull off this miracle, it's her. He glanced at the clock on the mantel. You have 2 hours before she arrives. I suggest you start reading. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. And Liora? It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sounded strange in his formal accent. Don't fail, he said. Because if you go down, you'll take my family's reputation with you, and I will make sure you regret it. The door closed behind him. Liora stood alone in the library, holding a book that might as well have been written in ancient Greek, and felt the full weight of what she'd agreed to settle onto her shoulders. She was going to fail. She was going to embarrass herself, humiliate the Duchess, and prove every single person in Thornhaven right that girls like her didn't belong in places like this. But then she thought of her father, probably coughing blood into a handkerchief right now, of Mara's worn-out shoes, of Tobin asking when things would get better. She opened the book, and she started reading. Lady Pemberton arrived at exactly 3 o'clock in a cloud of perfume and disapproval. She was perhaps 60, dressed in violet silk with a hat that featured an alarming number of feathers. She swept into the drawing room like a general inspecting troops, took one look at Liora, and sighed so deeply it seemed to come from her toes. Well, she said, we have our work cut out for us, don't we? It's nice to meet you too, Liora said dryly. Lady Pemberton's eyebrows shot up. Sarcasm, how delightful. Let's see if we can redirect that into something useful, shall we? She circled Liora slowly, the way the dressmaker had. Posture is abysmal. Chin up, shoulders back. Imagine a string pulling you up from the crown of your head. Liora straightened. Better. Now walk across the room. Just walk? Don't think. Just move. Liora walked. She made it about 5 steps before Lady Pemberton made a sound like a dying cat. Stop. Stop immediately. What is that? Walking? That is stomping. You move like you're trying to crush grapes. A lady glides. Watch. Lady Pemberton demonstrated moving across the room with a smoothness that seemed to defy the laws of physics. See? Heel to toe. Weight distributed evenly. No sound. You want me to float? I want you to look like you've been raised in a manor house, not a barn. Try again. For the next hour, Liora walked back and forth across the drawing room while Lady Pemberton critiqued every step. Too fast, too heavy, arms too stiff, head too low. By the time they moved on to curtsying, Liora's feet ached and her patience had worn thinner than rice paper. When you curtsy to someone of equal rank, you bend here, Lady Pemberton demonstrated. But keep your back straight. When you curtsy to royalty, you go deeper, like so. Never lose your balance, never wobble, and absolutely never, ever look at the floor. Why not? Because it makes you look subservient. You are about to become a duchess. You bow to almost no one. Act like it. Liora tried. Her knees didn't seem to want to cooperate with her brain. She wobbled, nearly fell, caught herself on a chair. Lady Pemberton pressed her fingers to her temples. Perhaps we should move on to conversation. Thank God. Sarcasm again. Charming. Lady Pemberton sat down and gestured for Liora to do the same. When speaking with members of the aristocracy, there are topics that are acceptable and topics that are absolutely forbidden. Acceptable: the weather, art, music, charitable works, horses. Forbidden: money, illness, politics, religion, and anything remotely personal. So basically, lie about everything and talk about nothing. Now you're learning. Lady Pemberton smiled, and for the first time it almost looked genuine. You're clever, Miss Hale. That will help. But cleverness without polish is just sharpness without purpose. My job is to give you the polish. They spent the next 2 hours on hypothetical conversations. Lady Pemberton would pose as various members of society, and Liora had to respond appropriately. Lady Ashford, how lovely to see you. I heard your son just returned from the continent. How wonderful! I do hope he enjoyed his travels. Wrong. You heard he was sent away after a scandal involving a married woman. You acknowledge nothing, express vague pleasantries, and change the subject. Try again. They drilled, and drilled, and drilled. By the time Lady Pemberton finally stood to leave, Leora's head was pounding, and she could barely remember her own name, let alone the names of 50 noble families. You're not hopeless, Lady Pemberton said at the door. But you're not ready either. We have 3 more days. I suggest you spend every waking moment preparing. Sleep when you're dead. That might be sooner than later, Leora muttered. Lady Pemberton actually laughed. I'm starting to like you, Miss Hale. Don't prove me wrong. She swept out, leaving Liora alone in the drawing room with a headache and the creeping certainty that she was going to fail spectacularly in front of everyone who mattered. The next 3 days were a brutal education in everything Liora had never known she didn't know. She woke at dawn for dance lessons with a terrifying instructor who rapped her knuckles with a stick every time she missed a step. She spent afternoons with Lady Pemberton, practicing small talk and memorizing the intricate web of relationships that connected every noble family. She had her meals critiqued. Apparently she chewed too loudly, drank too quickly, and held her fork like a peasant. At night she fell into bed so exhausted she couldn't even cry. Cassian was nowhere to be seen. He took his meals in his study, left the estate early each morning, and returned late each night. The few times Liora caught glimpses of him in the hallways, he looked through her like she was made of glass. Fine. She didn't need his help anyway. On the morning of the garden party, Liora woke to find 3 maids already in her room, carrying what looked like an entire wardrobe. Her Grace selected this, one of them said, holding up a gown that made Leora's breath catch. It was beautiful. Pale rose silk with delicate lace overlay, fitted at the waist and flowing into a skirt that shimmered when it moved. The neckline was modest but elegant. The sleeves were short, showing off arms that had been scrubbed and lotioned until they were softer than they'd been in years. Getting into the dress took 4 people and 20 minutes. The corset was even tighter than usual. The hair took an hour, pinned and curled and arranged with tiny pearl clips. Someone clasped a necklace around her throat. Real pearls this time, cool against her skin. When they finally finished, Liora looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a fraud. "You'll do beautifully, miss," one of the maids whispered. "Just remember what Lady Pemberton taught you." Right. Glide. Don't stomp. Smile. Don't smirk. Curtsy without wobbling. Talk about nothing. Reveal nothing. Easy. The garden party was already in full swing by the time Liora made her way downstairs. Through the windows, she could see hundreds of people scattered across the lawn, women in pastel gowns, men in dark suits, servants weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate pastries. Her stomach twisted. "There you are." The Duchess appeared at her elbow, resplendent in silver silk. "You look acceptable. That will have to do. Now listen carefully. You will enter on Cassian's arm. You will smile. You will nod. You will let him do most of the talking. Under no circumstances will you volunteer information about your background. If pressed, you defer to romance. We met, we fell in love. Details are private. Understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Good. And Liora," the Duchess's voice softened just slightly, "they will try to break you. Don't let them." Before Liora could respond, Cassian appeared. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly, his hair combed back, his expression as unreadable as ever. When his eyes landed on her, something flickered across his face too quickly to identify. "Shall we?" he said, offering his arm. Liora placed her hand on his sleeve. His arm was solid beneath the fabric, warm and real, and for some reason that small point of contact steadied her. They walked toward the doors leading to the garden. "Remember," Cassian said quietly, "you're in love with me. Try to look it. I'll do my best not to vomit on your shoes." His mouth twitched. "That's the spirit." The doors opened. Every head turned. The noise of the party didn't stop exactly, but it shifted. Conversations faltered. Eyes widened. Liora felt the weight of 200 stares land on her like a physical thing. Cassian led her down the steps and into the garden with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of being watched. Liora focused on breathing, on not tripping, on keeping her chin up and her expression pleasant. They made it about 10 feet before the first attack came. A woman in peacock blue silk stepped directly into their path. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Perfect hair, perfect skin, perfect cold smile. "Cassian," she purred, "how lovely to see you, and this must be your fiancé." The way she said fiancé made it sound like a communicable disease. "Lady Vivian," Cassian said smoothly, "allow me to introduce Miss Liora Hale. Liora, Lady Vivian Ashford." Ashford. Leora's brain scrambled. Lady Pemberton had mentioned her. Daughter of the Earl of Westbridge, engaged twice, broken it off both times. Rumored to have had her sights set on Cassian for years. Liora curtsied. Not too deep, not too shallow. "Lady Vivian, what a pleasure." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I must say, this is all very unexpected. How did you two meet? I don't recall seeing you at any of the usual events." "We met here, actually," Liora said, falling back on the script the Duchess had drilled into her. "Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them." "How poetic." Vivian's gaze traveled over Leora's dress, her hair, her face, cataloging every flaw. "And what does your family do, Miss Hale? I'm not familiar with the name." "My father is a florist." The words dropped into the conversation like stones into still water. Vivian's eyebrows rose. "A florist? How charming." Several nearby conversations had stopped entirely now. People were leaning in, not even pretending not to listen. "Yes," Liora said, keeping her voice steady. "He grows some of the most beautiful roses in the county. Perhaps you've seen them. We supply the estate." "I see." Vivian's smile turned sharp. "So you were an employee, and now you're… what? Cinderella?" The insult hung in the air. Cassian's hand covered Leora's where it rested on his arm. The gesture looked affectionate. His grip was steel. "Vivian," he said, his voice dropping into a register that would have frozen a river. "I'm sure you didn't mean to imply that my choice of bride is any of your concern." "Of course not," Vivian said quickly. "I only meant…" "I know exactly what you meant." Cassian's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "If you'll excuse us, there are other guests to greet." He steered Liora away before Vivian could respond. They made it another 20 feet before the next interrogation. And the next. And the next. It was like running a gauntlet. Every person wanted to know how they met, where Liora came from, whether the engagement was real. The questions were wrapped in politeness, but the hostility underneath was unmistakable. These people hated her, not because of anything she'd done, but because of what she represented, a crack in their perfect, ordered world. By the time they'd been at the party for an hour, Leora's face hurt from smiling and her feet ached in the delicate shoes. She excused herself to the powder room just to get 5 minutes of peace. The powder room was mercifully empty. Liora sank onto a velvet bench and pressed her hands to her temples. This was impossible. She couldn't do this. She couldn't stand in front of these people and pretend to be something she wasn't for 3 months. She couldn't… The door opened. 3 women walked in, laughing about something. They stopped when they saw Liora. One of them, a blonde in yellow silk, smiled. "Oh, it's you." Liora stood. "Excuse me, I was just leaving." "No, stay. We wanted to talk to you." The blonde exchanged glances with her friends. "We're curious. What's your secret?" "I don't know what you mean." "Come now. A duke doesn't just fall in love with a flower girl. Did you get pregnant? Is that why he's marrying you?" Leora's hands clenched. "No." "Then what? Magic? Blackmail?" The blonde stepped closer, her smile turning vicious. "Or are you just very, very good on your back?" The words hit like a punch to the gut. Liora had been insulted before, had been called poor, common, worthless. But this was different. This was designed to humiliate. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and met the blonde's eyes with a look that could have melted steel. "You want to know my secret?" Liora said quietly. "I didn't try. I didn't scheme. I didn't throw myself at him like apparently every other woman in this room has done. I was myself. And maybe that's what you can't stand, that being real is worth more than being perfect. The blonde's face went red. How dare you? No, how dare you? Liora stepped forward, and to her satisfaction, the woman actually stepped back. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me except that I'm not one of you. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? Because if someone like me can stand here wearing this dress on his arm, then maybe all your rules and titles and bloodlines don't matter as much as you thought. She pushed past them and walked out, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She'd just made enemies of half the women at this party, but she'd also just proven something to herself. She could fight back. She found Cassian standing near the fountain, deep in conversation with an older gentleman. When he saw her approaching, he excused himself and came to meet her. You look like you want to murder someone, he observed. Your friends are delightful, Liora said through gritted teeth. They're not my friends. They're vultures. He studied her face. What happened? Nothing I couldn't handle. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Good. Because it's about to get worse. How could it possibly? The Dowager just announced that we're opening the dancing, you and I, in front of everyone. Leora's stomach dropped. You're kidding. I don't kid, remember? But I've only had 3 days of lessons. Then I suggest you follow my lead very carefully. He offered his hand. Come on, time to perform. The crowd had already gathered around a section of lawn that had been cleared for dancing. Musicians waited with their instruments. The Duchess stood at the edge, watching them with those hawk eyes. Cassian led Liora to the center. His hand found her waist. Her hand found his shoulder. They stood there for a heartbeat, close enough that she could see the exact shade of gray in his eyes. Don't think, he murmured. Just move with me. The music started, and they danced. Liora had never danced like this before, in front of people who wanted her to fail, with a partner who was practically a stranger, wearing shoes that pinched and a corset that made breathing an Olympic sport. But Cassian was a good lead, strong, steady. He guided her through the steps with the same confidence he did everything else. And somehow, miraculously, she didn't trip. They turned. They stepped. They moved across the lawn like they'd done this 1,000 times. And slowly, impossibly, Liora stopped thinking about the steps. She looked up at Cassian and found him already looking at her. His expression was unreadable, but something in it made her breath catch. You're doing well, he said quietly. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. The music swelled. He spun her, and her skirt flared out in a perfect circle. When she came back to him, his hand on her waist tightened just slightly, and for just a moment it didn't feel like performing. It felt real. The song ended. Applause rippled through the crowd, polite, measured, giving away nothing. Cassian stepped back and bowed. Liora curtsied. They'd survived. As other couples moved onto the lawn to dance, Cassian leaned in close enough that only she could hear. You did well today, he said. Better than I expected. Thanks, I think. But this was just the beginning. They'll keep coming for you. Every day, every event, every conversation will be a test. Are you prepared for that? Liora thought of the women in the powder room, of Lady Vivian's cutting smile, of the 100 small cruelties she'd endured in just a few hours. Then she thought of her father, probably sleeping in a clean bed in the estate physician's quarters, of Mara and Tobin, safe and fed, of the chance, however slim, to build something better. I don't have a choice, she said. So yes, I'm prepared. Cassian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. The show they gave society over the next 6 weeks was nothing short of masterful theater. Liora learned to navigate ballrooms like a soldier, navigating a battlefield. She memorized names and faces and scandals. She smiled until her jaw ached and curtsied until her knees screamed. And slowly, impossibly, some of the hostility began to soften into grudging acceptance. Not everywhere. Not from everyone. But enough. Cassian played his part too. He appeared at her side at every event. his hand always finding the small of her back, his attention never wavering even when more interesting people demanded it. To the outside world, they looked like a couple deeply, genuinely in love. In private, they barely spoke. He worked 18-hour days managing his estates, his investments, his political obligations. She spent her time with Lady Pemberton, learning the 1,000 unspoken rules that governed aristocratic life. They passed each other in hallways like strangers, ate breakfast at opposite ends of a table meant for 20, existed in the same house but different worlds. It was easier that way, safer. Until the night everything changed. Liora was in the library, curled up in a leather chair with a book she wasn't really reading, when Cassian walked in. It was past midnight. She'd assumed he was still in his study. He stopped when he saw her, his hand still on the door. "I didn't know you were here." "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, moving to the sideboard where a crystal decanter sat next to 2 glasses. He poured himself 3 fingers of amber liquid and drank half of it in one swallow. Liora closed her book. "Bad day?" "Bad year." He refilled the glass, then hesitated. "Do you want one?" "I don't drink whiskey." "You do now." He poured a second glass and brought it to her. She took it, more out of curiosity than desire. The first sip burned all the way down. The second one was slightly better. Cassian sank into the chair across from hers with a heaviness that looked like exhaustion. "The House of Lords is pressuring me to marry faster," he said without preamble. "Apparently 3 months is too long an engagement for a man of my position." Leora's stomach tightened. "What did you tell them?" "That they can wait, but they're getting impatient." He stared into his glass like it held answers. "My mother's plan is backfiring. Instead of buying me time, this fake engagement is creating more pressure than before." "So what do we do?" "I don't know." He looked up at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something other than cold control in his eyes. He looked tired. Human. "Tell me something. Do you regret it? Saying yes to this insanity?" Liora thought about it, really thought about it. "Sometimes, when Lady Vivian accidentally spills wine on my dress, or when I hear the servants gossiping about how long it'll take before you come to your senses. But then I think about my father actually getting better, about Mara learning to read, about Tobin eating 3 meals a day. And no, I don't regret it. Even though you hate this life, I don't hate it. I just don't fit it. You fit better than you think." He took another drink. "You've surprised me, Liora. I expected you to crumble under the pressure. Most people would have. But you haven't. You've adapted, learned, fought back when necessary. That takes strength." The compliment caught her off guard. "Are you drunk?" "Getting there." "Well, don't stop on my account. This is the most honest conversation we've had in weeks." He smiled. It was small, fleeting, but real. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking whiskey and listening to the fire crackle. Outside, rain started to fall, tapping against the windows in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. "Can I ask you something?" Liora said. "You just did." "Funny. Why did you agree to this?" "Your mother's plan, I mean. You could have refused, sent me packing, but you didn't." Cassian was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "Because she was right. About the political pressure, about needing an heir, about all of it. I've been avoiding marriage because every woman I've met wanted the title, not the person. And I'm tired of being seen as a position to fill rather than a human being." He looked at her. "At least with you, I know exactly what you want. There's no pretense, no games. Just business. Just business." But something in the way he said it made Liora wonder if that was still true. She finished her whiskey and stood, suddenly needing distance. "I should go. It's late." "Liora." She turned. "Thank you," he said, "for keeping your end of the bargain. I know this hasn't been easy." "Neither has it for you." She left before either of them could say anything more. But that night, lying in her enormous bed in her borrowed room, Liora couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes when he'd thanked her. Like maybe, just maybe, this was becoming more than business for him too. And that terrified her more than any ballroom full of hostile aristocrats ever could. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the post like a bomb wrapped in expensive paper. Liora was having breakfast with the Duchess when Mrs. Grimsby entered carrying a silver tray with a single envelope on it. The housekeeper's face was pale. "Your Grace," she said quietly. "This just arrived. I think you should read it immediately." The Duchess took the envelope, her expression giving nothing away. But as she read the contents, her mouth tightened into a thin line. "What is it?" Liora asked. The Duchess handed her the letter without a word. It was printed on thick cardstock, the kind used for wedding invitations, but the message was anything but celebratory. To the esteemed members of society. "It has come to my attention that the engagement between Duke Cassian Drake and Miss Liora Hale is not what it appears to be. Miss Hale was, until recently, employed as a flower delivery girl. The arrangement between her and the Duke was brokered by the Dowager Duchess in a desperate attempt to force her son into marriage. This is not a love match. This is a transaction. I possess documentation proving the financial arrangement, including the payment made to clear the Hale family debts. I will be presenting this evidence at the Ashford Ball this Saturday evening. Sincerely, a concerned friend." Leora's hands shook. The paper crumpled in her grip. "Who sent this?" "I have my suspicions." The Duchess's voice was ice. "But it doesn't matter who. What matters is that in 4 days, at the most important social event of the season, someone is going to publicly expose this arrangement and destroy both your reputation and Cassian's political standing. Can we stop it? Prove it's a lie?" "It's not a lie. That's the problem." The Duchess stood, pacing to the window. "Everything in that letter is true. And if they have documentation, receipts, bank transfers, witness statements, we can't simply deny it. Then what do we do?" The Duchess turned. "We have 2 options. Option 1, you disappear. We claim the engagement was broken due to irreconcilable differences. You take your money and your family and vanish. Cassian weathers the scandal as a man who made a mistake, and eventually society forgets. And option 2? We double down. We turn the lie into truth before they can expose it." Leora's breath caught. "You mean actually get married? A rushed wedding, this week, before the ball. Once you're married, the financial arrangement becomes irrelevant. You weren't bought, you were courted. The debt payment becomes a generous gift from a man helping his future wife's family. The narrative changes completely." "That's insane. That's survival." The Duchess's gaze was sharp as broken glass. "But I won't force you. This has to be your choice. Walk away now or commit fully. There's no middle ground anymore." The door opened. Cassian walked in, still in his riding clothes, his hair windswept. He looked between them and immediately understood something was wrong. "What happened?" The Duchess handed him the letter. Liora watched his face as he read, watched the muscles in his jaw tighten, watched his knuckles go white around the paper. "Who knows about this?" he asked quietly. "Just us, for now, but by Saturday, it'll be public knowledge." "Then we have 4 days." "To do what?" Liora asked. Cassian looked at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "To decide if we're going to let them win, or if we're going to fight back." "How do we fight this? They have proof." "So we make the proof irrelevant." He set the letter down with deliberate calm. "We get married, immediately, before they can weaponize the truth against us." "That's what your mother suggested." "Then for once, I agree with her." He crossed to stand directly in front of Liora. "I know this wasn't the deal. I know you signed up for 3 months of pretending, not a lifetime commitment. But if we do this, if we actually marry, we control the narrative. We take their ammunition and render it useless." "And after?" Leora's voice was barely a whisper. "After we've weathered the scandal? What then?" "Then we figure it out. Together." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to trust me enough to take this risk." Liora looked at this man who'd been a stranger 6 weeks ago, who'd treated her like an inconvenience at first, then a business partner, and lately like something more complicated than either of those things. She thought about walking away, taking her family and disappearing into obscurity, living a quiet, safe life where nobody knew her name and nobody cared about her mistakes. Then she thought about the women who'd insulted her in powder rooms, the men who dismissed her at dinner parties, the entire aristocratic machine that had tried to grind her down and prove she didn't belong. If she left now, they won. They got to be right about her, and Liora Hale had never been good at letting people be right when they were wrong. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I want guarantees. I want my own income, my own accounts. I won't be dependent on your generosity for the rest of my life." Cassian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Done. What else?" "I want my family protected, not just now, but permanently. No matter what happens between us." "Done. And I want the truth. If this becomes real, I need to know you're choosing it, not being trapped into it." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exact moment his expression shifted from business to something far more dangerous. "I stopped being trapped the moment you told Lady Vivian off in the garden," he said quietly. "Everything since then has been a choice. My choice." The air between them felt electric. "So what's your answer?" he asked. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" Liora looked into those winter-gray eyes and made a decision that would change everything. Yes. They were married 3 days later in the estate's private chapel with only the Duchess, Lady Pemberton, and a handful of witnesses present. Liora wore a simple white dress that the dressmaker had somehow created in 48 hours. No veil, no flowers, no music. Just a priest speaking words that made a lie into truth, and a gold ring sliding onto her finger with a weight that felt like destiny. Cassian's hand was steady when he took hers. His voice didn't waver when he spoke his vows. And when the priest declared them married, he kissed her with a gentleness that surprised her. It lasted exactly 3 seconds, barely enough to be called a kiss at all. But it changed something, shifted something, made the air between them feel different than it had 5 minutes before. "Well," the Duchess said, raising a glass of champagne, "that's done. Now, let's prepare for war." The Ashford ball was the next evening. Every member of high society would be there, including whoever had sent the letter, including whoever wanted to destroy them. Liora spent the day preparing. Another dress, another painful hairstyle, another round of instructions from Lady Pemberton about how to carry herself as an actual duchess now, not just a fake fiancée. But when evening came and she descended the stairs to meet Cassian, she felt different, steadier, like she'd finally stopped pretending to belong and started claiming her space instead. Cassian waited at the bottom of the stairs in formal evening wear. When he saw her, something flickered in his expression. "You look beautiful," he said. It was the first compliment he'd ever given her that felt real. "Thank you." He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." The Ashford Ball was held at the family's London townhouse, a massive Georgian building that blazed with light from every window. Carriages lined the street, music drifted out into the night, and inside 300 of society's most powerful people gathered to see and be seen. Liora and Cassian arrived fashionably late, which Lady Pemberton had insisted was essential. "Let them wait for you," she'd said. "Let them wonder if you'll show at all." The butler announced them at the ballroom entrance. His Grace, the Duke of Drake, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Drake. The room didn't go silent. That only happened in novels. But conversations faltered, heads turned, eyes tracked them as they descended the stairs into the ballroom. Liora kept her chin up, her hand steady on Cassian's arm, her expression serene. They'd barely made it to the center of the room when Lady Vivian appeared, resplendent in emerald silk and wearing a smile that would have made a shark nervous. "Duke Drake," she purred, "and the new Duchess. How surprising to see you both." "Lady Vivian," Cassian's voice could have frozen fire. "Always a pleasure." "I heard the most interesting rumor," Vivian continued, her eyes fixed on Liora, "that you two rushed the wedding, almost as if you were trying to avoid some kind of scandal." "We rush nothing," Cassian said. "When you know, you know. Why wait?" "How romantic." Vivian's smile sharpened. "Though I must admit I'm curious about the financial arrangements. I heard the Duchess's family debts were paid quite generously, almost like a purchase price." Several nearby conversations stopped completely. Liora felt Cassian tense beside her. This was it, the attack they'd been expecting. But before either of them could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "How dare you!" Everyone turned. The Dowager Duchess stood 10 feet away, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral, her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you!" she repeated, stalking toward Vivian with the predatory grace of a hunting cat. "You stand in this ballroom, wearing a dress your father's debts can barely afford, and you have the audacity to question my son's marriage?" Vivian's face went pale. "Your Grace, I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said. You've spent years throwing yourself at my son like a cat in heat, and now that he's chosen someone else, someone with actual character, you're trying to destroy her out of petty jealousy." The room was dead silent now. Everyone watching, everyone listening. "The Hale family debts were paid as a wedding gift," the Duchess continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "A generous gesture from a man who understands that love means supporting your partner's family. Perhaps if your own suitors had shown such generosity, you wouldn't be standing here alone at 32, bitter and desperate." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "You can't speak to me like that. I can speak to you however I please. Now, get out of my sight before I say something really cutting." Vivian fled, actually turned and ran from the ballroom, her dress trailing behind her like a wounded peacock. The Duchess turned to face the room at large. "If anyone else has questions about my son's marriage, I invite you to voice them now. Otherwise, I suggest we all move on to more interesting topics, like who's sleeping with whom this season, which I'm sure is far more scandalous than a duke marrying for love." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Conversations slowly resumed. The crisis had been averted. For now. Cassian leaned close to Leora's ear. "We need to find out who sent that letter before they try again." "How?" "I have an idea. Follow my lead." He guided her through the ballroom, greeting people, making small talk, all while his eyes scanned the crowd like he was hunting something. They were near the refreshment table when Liora saw it. A man in the corner, middle-aged and nondescript, watching them with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When their eyes met, he smiled, and she knew. "Cassian," she whispered. 10 o'clock, gray suit." Cassian looked. His expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on her waist. "That's Lord Pembroke, Vivian's uncle, and one of my biggest political rivals." "He sent the letter?" "Probably, but we need proof." Lord Pembroke chose that moment to approach them, his smile pleasant, his eyes cold. "Your Grace, and the new Duchess, congratulations on your hasty marriage." "Lord Pembroke," Cassian's voice was neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Such an interesting development." He turned to Liora. "Tell me, Your Grace, how does it feel to go from delivering flowers to wearing a duchess's coronet?" "About the same as it must feel to go from respected lord to petty blackmailer," Liora said sweetly. "Though I imagine the shame is harder to wash off." Pembroke's smile froze. "I beg your pardon?" "You sent the letter. We both know it. The question is what you hope to gain." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Cassian stepped forward. "Then you won't mind if I mention to your creditors that you've been spreading malicious rumors about my family. I'm sure they'll be very understanding when I call in your debts. All of them. At once." Pembroke's face went from pale to gray. "You can't." "I can, and I will, unless you admit what you've done and explain why." For a long moment, Pembroke just stared at them. Then his shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly old, defeated. "Vivian asked me to," he said quietly. "She wanted revenge. Wanted you humiliated. I told her it was a mistake, but she insisted. She even gave me the documentation." "Where is it now?" Cassian demanded. "Destroyed. When I heard you'd actually married, I burned everything. There's no proof left. No scandal to expose." He looked at Liora with something that might have been regret. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." "No," Liora said. "I didn't." Pembroke walked away, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost. Cassian exhaled slowly. "Well, that's handled." "Is it?" Liora looked around at the ballroom full of people who still whispered behind their fans, still judged with their eyes. They'll always question us, always wonder if it's real. Then we make it real. Cassian turned to face her fully, his hands finding hers. No more pretending, no more business arrangements, just us, figuring out what this marriage actually means. And if we can't figure it out, then at least we tried. He pulled her closer, right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of everyone who mattered. Dance with me? People are staring. Let them. The music swelled. Cassian led her onto the floor, his hand firm on her waist, his eyes locked on hers. And as they danced, Liora realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt like relief. She wasn't pretending anymore. Somewhere between the garden party and the wedding, between the whiskey in the library and this moment on the ballroom floor, her feelings had shifted from tolerance to something far more dangerous. She was falling for him. Maybe had already fallen. And judging by the way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the room, like the past 6 weeks had changed him as much as they'd changed her, he was falling too. The song ended. They stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by 300 witnesses to a marriage that had started as a lie and somehow turned into truth. Cassian's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Ready to go home? Home. Not the estate, not his house. Home. Yes, Liora said. They left the ball together, the new Duke and Duchess of Drakey, and somewhere in the London night, between the carriage and the estate gates, Cassian kissed her again. This time, it lasted longer than 3 seconds. This time, it felt like a promise. The kiss in the carriage changed everything and nothing at all. They returned to the estate in charged silence, Cassian's hand covering hers on the seat between them, both of them acutely aware that crossing from performance to reality meant navigating entirely new territory. When they arrived, he walked her to her bedroom door like a gentleman, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt more intimate than the one they'd shared in the carriage, and said goodnight. Liora lay awake until dawn, replaying every moment, every look, every word, wondering if she'd imagined the shift between them or if it was as real as the ring on her finger. The next morning brought her answer in the form of Cassian knocking on her door at breakfast time, still in his riding clothes, looking windswept and uncertain in a way she'd never seen. I thought we could eat together, he said. Unless you'd prefer… No, I mean, yes, together is good. They ate in the smaller dining room, the one meant for family rather than state dinners. The conversation was halting at first, almost awkward, like two people learning a new language. But slowly, carefully, they began to find their rhythm. Tell me something about yourself I don't know, Cassian said over coffee. Something real. Liora thought about it. I used to steal books from the lending library when I was 12. Not to keep them, just to read them faster than my borrowing limit allowed. I'd sneak them back before anyone noticed. His mouth twitched. A criminal duchess. How scandalous. Your turn. He was quiet for a moment, staring into his cup. I was terrified the day I inherited the title. 25 years old and suddenly responsible for thousands of people, dozens of estates, centuries of legacy. I locked myself in my father's study and cried for an hour before I could face anyone. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw. I'm glad you told me, Liora said quietly. So am I. They spent the morning together, walking the grounds, talking about everything and nothing, and when he took her hand while they crossed the garden, it felt natural. Right. But that afternoon, reality crashed back in with the force of a battering ram. Mrs. Grimsby appeared in the doorway of Leora's sitting room, her expression grimmer than usual. Your Grace, there's a delegation here to see you. From the village. Leora's stomach dropped. What delegation? The Merchant Council. They're requesting an audience with the Duchess. Cassian appeared behind the housekeeper. He must have been summoned too. Show them to the blue room. We'll be down shortly. When Mrs. Grimsby left, he turned to Liora. This is about you. They want to see what kind of duchess a florist's daughter makes. Should I be worried? Probably, but you've handled worse. The blue room was a formal receiving chamber decorated in shades of azure and cream. 6 men waited there, all dressed in their best suits, all wearing expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Liora recognized 3 of them, Mr. Hendricks, who ran the butcher shop, Mr. Chen from the general store, and standing at the back, looking uncomfortable, the moneylender who'd held her family's debts. "Gentlemen," Cassian said, his voice cool and formal, "to what do we owe this visit?" Mr. Hendricks stepped forward. He was a big man, red-faced and broad-shouldered, with the kind of voice that carried across market squares. "Your Grace, we've come to discuss matters concerning the village and the estate's relationship with local businesses." "I'm listening." "The previous Duke, your father, had certain agreements with the merchants of Thornhaven. Fair prices for estate purchases, priority for local suppliers, support during hard seasons." Hendricks glanced at Liora, his expression unreadable. "We're concerned these arrangements might change, given recent developments." "You mean, given my wife's background?" Cassian said flatly. "We mean no disrespect, Your Grace. But the Duchess was one of us not 2 months ago. Now she's in a position of considerable power. We want to ensure that she understands the delicate balance between the estate and the village." Liora felt heat rise in her cheeks. They weren't here to congratulate her. They were here to remind her of her place, to make sure she didn't get ideas above her station. "The Duchess understands perfectly," Cassian said, his voice dropping into that dangerous register that meant someone was about to regret their words. "Let me speak for myself," Liora interrupted. Cassian looked at her, surprised, then nodded once and stepped back. Liora stood, smoothing her skirts, and faced the men who'd known her since childhood. "You're right, I was one of you. I delivered your flowers, shopped in your stores, borrowed money from you." She looked directly at the moneylender, who had the grace to look ashamed. "At interest rates that should be illegal. I know exactly what it's like to live in Thornhaven as someone without power, which is precisely why I understand your concerns." "Then you'll maintain the old agreements?" Mr. Chen asked. "No." The word fell like a stone. Several of the men exchanged glances. "I won't maintain them," Liora continued, "because they weren't fair to begin with. The estate paid fair prices, yes, but only to certain merchants. The ones who had connections, who knew the right people. Everyone else was shut out. That system benefited some of you while leaving others to struggle." "That's how business works," Hendricks said. "That's how corruption works, and it's going to change." She looked each man in the eye. "Here's my proposal. The estate will open competitive bidding for all contracts. Anyone can submit. The best quality of the best price wins, regardless of who you know or how long your family's been here. We'll also establish an emergency fund for merchants facing hardship, real hardship, not just bad business decisions. And we'll create apprenticeship programs to train young people in trades so they're not trapped in poverty like I was." Silence. Mr. Hendricks' face had gone from red to purple. "You can't just upend decades of tradition." "I can, and I will." Liora's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Because I remember what it was like to be powerless. And now that I have power, I'm going to use it for something other than protecting the people who already have enough." "The Duke would never allow—" "The Duke," Cassian said quietly, "thinks his wife is brilliant and fully supports her proposal." More silence, heavy and shocked. Finally, Mr. Chen spoke. "When you put it that way, Your Grace, it does seem more equitable." "It is equitable. That's the point." Liora softened slightly. "I'm not trying to punish anyone. I'm trying to build something better, for everyone, including the people who've been left out of how things have always been done." The delegation left 20 minutes later, some of them grudgingly impressed, others clearly furious. But they left knowing that the Duchess of Drake was not going to be a decorative figurehead who signed papers and kept her mouth shut. When the door closed behind them, Cassian turned to her with something like awe in his expression. "That was extraordinary," he said. "That was terrifying." "You didn't look terrified. You looked like you were born to do this." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "You're not just surviving anymore, Liora. You're leading, and you're good at it." "I'm making enemies." "All good leaders do. The question is whether you're making the right enemies." He smiled. "And you are." Over the following weeks, Liora threw herself into transforming the relationship between the estate and the village. She reviewed every contract, met with every merchant, listened to complaints and suggestions from people who'd never been asked their opinion before. It wasn't easy. The established merchants who'd benefited from the old system fought her at every turn. Rumors spread that she was playing favorites, that she didn't understand business, that she was going to bankrupt the estate with her naive idealism. But slowly, things began to change. A young carpenter who'd been shut out of estate work for years won a contract to repair the stable roof. He did such excellent work that Cassian commissioned him for 3 more projects. A widow who'd been struggling to keep her bakery open got a loan from the emergency fund and used it to expand. Within months, she was employing 5 people and supplying bread to half the county. The apprenticeship program started with 12 young people, including Tobin, who'd always been good with his hands. Liora made sure girls were included too, breaking another tradition that said certain trades were for men only. Every small victory felt like proof. Proof that she hadn't been wrong to take this risk. Proof that she belonged here not because she'd married into power, but because she was using that power for something that mattered. But not everyone was convinced. Lady Vivian had retreated from society after the humiliation at the Ashford ball, but her allies remained. They whispered in drawing rooms and at dinner parties about the upstart duchess who thought she could rewrite centuries of tradition. They questioned her judgment, her intelligence, her right to the title. And then, 3 months into her marriage, they made their move. Liora was in her study, the small room Cassian had given her to use as an office, when Lady Pemberton arrived unannounced, her face pale. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "The social kind. There's going to be a vote." Leora's stomach clenched. "A vote on what?" "On whether to formally recognize you as a member of the Ladies' Council. It's a formality, usually. A new duchess is welcomed automatically, but several members are calling for a vote instead. They're arguing that you haven't proven yourself worthy of the title. Can they do that?" "Technically, yes. And if they succeed, if they vote to deny you recognition, you'll be effectively barred from every important social function. No balls, no charity events, no political gatherings. You'll be a duchess in name only." Liora sank into her chair. "When is the vote?" "Next week, at the quarterly council meeting." Lady Pemberton's expression was grim. "And Liora, you should know. Lady Vivian is one of the members calling for it. She's convinced several others to support her." "Of course she has." "You'll need to attend. Present your case. Convince them you deserve the title." "How am I supposed to do that?" "By showing them what you've accomplished. By proving that being born into power isn't the only qualification that matters." Lady Pemberton leaned forward. "You've changed more in 3 months than most duchesses change in 30 years. Use that. Make them see it." That night, Liora told Cassian about the vote over dinner. His reaction was immediate and volcanic. "They can't do this. It's a witch hunt." "They can do it, and they will. The question is whether I'm going to let them win." "What do you need from me?" She looked at him across the table. This man who'd been a stranger 4 months ago, who'd become a partner, a friend, something more than either of those things. "Nothing," she said. "This is my fight. I need to win it myself. You don't have to do everything alone anymore." "I know, but I need to do this, to prove to myself as much as to them that I belong here." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then show them what I already know, that they're lucky to have you." The week before the vote, Liora worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life. She compiled evidence of every change she'd made, every life she'd improved, every tradition she'd challenged, and why. She practiced her speech until she could recite it in her sleep, and she prepared herself for the very real possibility that it wouldn't be enough. The day of the vote arrived cold and gray, the sky threatening rain. The Ladies' Council met in the assembly hall of the Thornhaven Manor House, a historic building that had hosted councils and courts for 300 years. Liora arrived early, dressed in a deep burgundy gown that the Dowager Duchess had selected for her. "Make them take you seriously," the Duchess had said. "Look like power. Be power." The assembly hall was arranged like a small parliament. 25 women sat in a semicircle facing a single chair where Liora was meant to sit. Some faces were neutral. Some were curious. But several, including Lady Vivian, who sat in the front row, looked openly hostile. Lady Ashford, the council president, called the meeting to order. She was 80, if she was a day, steel-haired and sharp-eyed. the kind of woman who'd probably been formidable since birth. "We are here to vote on the formal recognition of Duchess Liora Drake as a member of this council," she announced. "Before we vote, the Duchess will have the opportunity to address us." "Your Grace?" Liora stood. Her legs felt like water, her hands trembled, but she walked to the center of the room, lifted her chin, and began. "Ladies of the Council, I know why some of you have called for this vote. You look at me and see someone who doesn't belong, who wasn't born to this, who doesn't understand your world or your traditions, and you're right." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I wasn't born to this," Liora continued. "I was born in a cottage with 3 rooms and a leaking roof. I grew up knowing what it's like to be hungry, to be cold, to watch people I loved suffer because we had no power and no options. So no, I don't understand your world the way you do, but I understand something you don't. I understand what it's like to be invisible." She looked directly at Lady Vivian. "I know what it's like to serve people who never learned my name, to work until my hands bled and still fall short, to be dismissed and discarded like I was nothing. And when I became Duchess, I had a choice. I could forget where I came from and protect the comfortable life I'd stumbled into. Or I could remember and use whatever power I had to make sure other people didn't have to suffer the way I did." Liora pulled papers from her portfolio. "In the past 3 months, the estate's charitable fund has helped 37 families avoid eviction. We've created jobs for 63 people who were unemployed. We've funded education for 20 children who would never have had the opportunity otherwise. And we've begun reforming systems that have kept the same families in power while everyone else struggles." "Those are numbers," Lady Vivian said coldly, "not qualifications." "You're right. They're not qualifications, they're results." Liora's voice strengthened. "I didn't study etiquette my whole life. I didn't learn languages and dancing and the proper way to address a countess. But I learned how to survive, how to fight, how to see problems and find solutions instead of just accepting that this is how things have always been. And I'm using those skills to make real change." Lady Ashford leaned forward. "Do you believe tradition has no value, Your Grace?" "I believe tradition has immense value when it serves people, when it creates beauty and meaning and connection. But when tradition becomes an excuse to protect cruelty or maintain injustice, it needs to change. And I'm not afraid to be the one who changes it." "Even if it makes you unpopular?" another council member asked. "Especially then, because popularity is what you have when everyone likes you. Respect is what you earn when you do what's right, even when it's hard." Silence filled the room, heavy and electric. Lady Ashford stood. "Thank you, Your Grace. You may step outside while we vote." Liora walked out on shaking legs. The corridor outside the assembly hall was empty except for Lady Pemberton, who'd been waiting. "How did it go?" she whispered. "I have no idea." They waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, the doors opened. Lady Ashford stood framed in the doorway. "Your Grace," she said, "the council has reached a decision." Leora's heart hammered. This was it. Either acceptance or humiliation. Either belonging or permanent exile from the world she'd fought so hard to survive in. Lady Ashford's stern expression didn't change. "The vote was 23-2 in favor of your recognition. Welcome to the Ladies' Council, Duchess Drake." The relief was so overwhelming Liora actually swayed. Lady Pemberton caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," Liora managed. "Don't thank me. You earned it." Lady Ashford's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Though I should mention, the 2 votes against you were from ladies who've never changed anything in their lives except their jewelry. I wouldn't worry about them." As Liora walked back into the assembly hall, something shifted. The women who'd been skeptical now looked at her with something like respect. Even the ones who'd voted against her had the grace to look uncomfortable. Only Lady Vivian refused to meet her eyes. After the meeting, several council members approached Liora to introduce themselves properly and offer collaboration on various projects. Lady Ashford pulled her aside and spoke quietly about upcoming initiatives that might benefit from Leora's particular perspective. For the first time since she'd signed the Dowager Duchess's contract, Liora felt like she might actually belong. She returned to the estate to find Cassian waiting in the entrance hall, clearly having delayed a trip to London just to hear the news. Well? He asked. 23-2. His face broke into a genuine smile, rare and beautiful. I knew you could do it. Did you? No, but I hoped. There's a difference. He crossed to her, taking both her hands. You've proven something today, Liora, not just to them, to yourself. What's that? That you're not a duchess because you married me. You're a duchess because you chose to be one, and you're better at it than most people born to the title. She looked up at him, this man who'd started as a stranger, become an ally, and somewhere along the way turned into something she didn't have words for yet. Thank you, she said, for believing I could do this. Thank you for proving me right. He kissed her then, right there in the entrance hall where any servant might see, and Liora kissed him back, no longer caring who watched or what they thought. She'd won. Not just the vote, not just acceptance into society, but something bigger. She'd proven that power wasn't about bloodlines or birthright. It was about what you chose to do with whatever advantages you had. And she was just getting started. That evening, at dinner with the Dowager Duchess, the older woman raised her glass in a rare toast. To the Duchess, she said, who has accomplished in 4 months what most duchesses never accomplish in a lifetime. I had good teachers, Liora said. You had obstacles. You overcame them. That's entirely different. The Duchess took a sip of wine. You've made me proud, Liora, and more importantly, you've made yourself proud. That matters more. Later, alone in their sitting room, they'd begun sharing the space in the evenings, a gradual intimacy that felt natural. Cassian handed Liora an envelope. What's this? Open it. Inside was a deed to a shop in Thornhaven's Market Square. I don't understand. You wanted independence, your own income. This is yours. The property, the business license, everything. What you do with it is entirely up to you. He watched her carefully. I thought maybe you'd want to open a florist shop, a real one that pays fair wages and gives opportunities to people like you used to be. Liora stared at the deed, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. I don't know what to say. Say you'll build something amazing, something that's entirely yours. She looked at him, and in that moment, she understood what was happening between them. This wasn't obligation anymore, wasn't performance or survival or business. This was partnership, trust, the foundation of something real. I will, she promised. And Cassian? Yes? Thank you. For all of it. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this impossible situation had turned into something worth keeping. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall. But inside, by the fire, the Duke and Duchess of Drake sat together planning a future neither of them had expected. And for the first time in her life, Liora wasn't just surviving. She was building something that would last. The florist shop opened on a crisp October morning, 6 months after Liora had become a duchess. She'd spent weeks transforming the space, stripping old paint, installing new shelves, designing a layout that felt both professional and welcoming. The sign above the door read, Hale and Drake Fine Florals, an elegant script, a deliberate fusion of who she'd been and who she'd become. Cassian had wanted to hire staff for her. She'd refused. Instead, she'd recruited 3 young women from the village who needed work and trained them herself. Girls who reminded her of who she'd been not so long ago, hungry, determined, invisible to the people who mattered. The grand opening drew a crowd that surprised even Liora. Villagers curious to see what the Duchess had built, merchants assessing potential competition, and to her shock, several members of the Ladies' Council, including Lady Ashford herself. Impressive, Lady Ashford said, examining a display of autumn arrangements. You've created something genuinely beautiful here. Thank you. Though I should mention these aren't just decorative. Every arrangement comes with information about the flowers, their meanings, growing seasons, care instructions. I want people to understand what they're buying. Education and commerce. How very you. Lady Ashford smiled. I'd like to place a standing order, weekly arrangements for the council chambers. It was a public endorsement, a signal to society that the Duchess's business was legitimate, worthy of patronage. Other orders followed. By the end of the first week, Hale and Drakey had more business than Leora's father had seen in a year. She visited him often at the estate physician's cottage, where he'd been living since the marriage. His health had improved dramatically. The constant medical care, the clean air, the absence of grinding poverty had given him back years he'd thought were lost. "You've done well for yourself, little bird," he said one afternoon, using his old nickname for her. They sat in the cottage garden, surrounded by flowers he'd planted himself. "Better than I ever dreamed. I got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You made a choice, a brave one, and you fought for it every day since." He took her hand, his grip still weak but steady. "Your mother would be so proud." Leora's throat tightened. "I hope so. I know so. She always said you had fire in you, that you'd do something extraordinary." He smiled. Turns out she was right. Mara was thriving too. At 15, she'd blossomed under the care of a governess the Duchess had hired, devouring books and languages with the hunger of someone who'd been denied education for too long. And Tobin, now 14, had shown such aptitude in the apprenticeship program that he'd been offered a position with the estate's master carpenter. Everything Liora had fought for was coming together, but not everyone was happy about it. The backlash came in November, swift and vicious. A pamphlet began circulating through Thornhaven and the surrounding estates. Crudely printed but widely distributed, it detailed what it called the Common Duchess's corruption. It accused Liora of using her position to enrich her family, of steering estate contracts to her friends, of undermining established businesses to benefit her own shop. None of it was true. But truth mattered less than scandal. Liora found out about it when one of her shop employees brought a copy to her, hands shaking. "Your Grace, people are reading this everywhere. They're saying terrible things." Liora read the pamphlet, her stomach churning with each fabricated accusation. Someone had gone to considerable effort to destroy her. The question was who. She brought it to Cassian that evening. He read it once, his expression darkening with each paragraph, then threw it into the fire. "This is slander," he said flatly. "Actionable slander. We can prosecute whoever wrote this. We'd have to prove who wrote it first. And even if we did, dragging this through the courts would just give it more attention." "Then what do you suggest?" Liora stared into the flames consuming the pamphlet. "I fight back with the truth, publicly, undeniably." The next morning, she did something unprecedented. She called a public assembly in Thornhaven's Market Square and invited everyone, villagers, merchants, aristocrats, anyone who wanted to come. Cassian thought she was insane. The Dowager Duchess called it risky. Lady Pemberton said it was either brilliant or suicidal, and she couldn't determine which. But Liora did it anyway. The square was packed. Hundreds of people gathered in the cold November air, their breath-making clouds, their faces curious and skeptical and hostile in equal measure. Liora stood on the steps of the town hall, her heart hammering, very aware that she was about to either cement her position or destroy it completely. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice carrying across the square. "I know you've all seen the pamphlet. I know what it says about me. And I'm here to address every accusation directly." The crowd murmured. Someone in the back shouted, "Why should we believe you?" "Because I'm going to show you proof, real proof, not anonymous accusations but documented facts." She pulled out a ledger. "This is the record of every estate contract awarded in the past 6 months. You'll see that my family has received exactly nothing. My father lives in the physician's cottage as part of my marriage settlement, a settlement arranged before any of these reforms began. My siblings receive education, also part of that settlement. Beyond that, they've gotten the same opportunities as everyone else. No special treatment, no corruption." She handed the ledger to a merchant in the front row. "Pass it around. Check the numbers yourself." "What about your flower shop?" someone called. "You're using your position to drive out competition." "Am I?" "Mr. Brennan, you run the other florist in town. Has your business suffered since I opened?" An older man near the middle of the crowd shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no. Actually, business has increased. People are buying more flowers in general. Because I'm not trying to destroy competition. I'm trying to grow the market. When people see quality, they want more of it. That benefits everyone." Liora looked across the faces staring at her. "Here's what I think really bothers some of you. Not that I'm corrupt, but that I'm succeeding. That a girl who used to deliver your flowers is now in a position of power. And instead of failing like you expected, like maybe some of you hoped, I'm actually making things better." "Better for who?" a woman shouted. "Your friends? People like you?" "Better for people who've been shut out. Yes, but also better for everyone else. The rising tide lifts all boats. When more people have money, they spend it. When more people have education, they create opportunity. When more people have power, the whole community gets stronger." "Pretty words," another voice called. "But you're still just a commoner playing Duchess." The words hit their mark. Liora felt the sting, the old shame trying to rise up and choke her. But then Cassian stepped forward from where he'd been standing at the edge of the crowd. She hadn't known he was there. "You're absolutely right," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "She is a commoner. She grew up with nothing, worked until her hands bled, watched people she loved suffer, and then she was given an impossible choice: pretend to be something she wasn't, or watch her family starve." The crowd went silent, every eye fixed on the Duke. "Most people would have failed," Cassian continued, "would have been crushed by the pressure, the hostility, the constant attacks from people determined to prove she didn't belong. But she didn't fail. She adapted. She learned. She fought back. And in 6 months, she's accomplished more than most duchesses accomplish in a lifetime. Not because of her birth, but in spite of it." He climbed the steps to stand beside Liora, taking her hand in front of everyone. "I married her because my mother forced me into it. That's true. But I stay married to her because she's the strongest, bravest, most remarkable person I've ever met. And if you can't see that, if all you can see is where she came from instead of what she's building, then you're the ones who don't belong. Not her." Leora's eyes stung. She'd fought her own battles for so long, proved herself over and over, that having someone else fight for her felt almost overwhelming. Lady Ashford stepped forward. Next, her cane tapping against the cobblestones. "I've been on the Ladies' Council for 40 years. I've watched dozens of women take the title of Duchess. Most of them were decorative, useless, more concerned with their wardrobes than their responsibilities. Duchess Drakey is not one of those women. She's a reformer, a builder, and yes, she makes people uncomfortable, but meaningful change always does." One by one, others stepped forward. Mr. Chen, whose business had improved under the new contract system. The widow who'd expanded her bakery. Young people from the apprenticeship program. All of them speaking up, sharing what Leora's reforms had meant for them. Not everyone was convinced. Liora could see faces in the crowd that remained hostile, skeptical. But slowly, the tide shifted. The angry murmurs became thoughtful silence. The skepticism became grudging acknowledgement. Finally, an older woman pushed her way to the front. Liora recognized her, Mrs. Patterson, the miller's wife, someone who'd known her family for years. "I remember you as a child," Mrs. Patterson said, "barefoot and dirty, helping your father in the shop. You were nobody then, easy to overlook, but I also remember the day your mother died. You were 16, and instead of breaking, you stood up and took care of your whole family. You've been fighting ever since, so no, you weren't born a duchess. But you've earned it more than most people who were." The words broke something in Liora. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you who spoke up, and to those who didn't, who still have doubts. I understand. I'll keep proving myself, every single day if I have to." The assembly dispersed slowly. Some people left still grumbling, but many others approached to shake Leora's hand, to offer support, to ask about opportunities for their own children in her programs. The pamphlet had tried to destroy her. Instead, it had forced her to show the community exactly what she was building. And the community had responded. Not all of them, but enough. That evening, Cassian found Liora in the estate library, staring out at the grounds with a glass of wine in her hand. "You were magnificent today," he said. "I cried in front of everyone. You were human in front of everyone. There's a difference." He joined her at the window. "We still don't know who wrote the pamphlet. I have my suspicions. Vivian? Or someone working for her. But it doesn't matter anymore. They tried to use my background against me, and it backfired. Made me stronger instead of weaker." Cassian turned her to face him. "You know what I realized today? Watching you up there, fighting for what you've built? I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Liora's breath caught. What? I'm in love with you. Have been for weeks, probably. Maybe longer. I just didn't have the courage to say it. His hands cupped her face gently. This stopped being business for me a long time ago, Liora. This became real. Cassian, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. You idiot. She laughed through tears. I've been in love with you since the night you got drunk and told me I had spine. I just thought you were still treating this as a political arrangement. I'm many things, but I'm not that good an actor. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. So what do we do now? Now we stop pretending this is temporary. We build a life, a real one. He kissed her, and it felt different from all the other kisses they'd shared. This one was a promise, a choice, a beginning. They were married in truth now, not bound by contracts or obligations, but by something far stronger. The winter months brought more challenges. The pamphlet's author was eventually traced back to Lady Vivian's personal secretary, though Vivian herself denied all knowledge. The scandal ruined her completely. She was shunned by society and eventually fled to the continent, her reputation in tatters. Liora felt no triumph in her enemy's downfall, just a weary relief that the attacks had finally ended. Hale and Drakey flourished. By spring, Liora had expanded to 3 locations and was training 12 employees. Every one of them came from circumstances similar to her own, young people who needed opportunity more than charity. The estate reforms continued. The competitive bidding system was so successful that neighboring estates began adopting it. The apprenticeship program grew to include 50 participants. And slowly, steadily, the rigid class barriers that had defined the county for centuries began to crack, not break. Liora was realistic enough to know that systemic change took time. But crack, shift, create space for people who'd been locked out. On their first wedding anniversary, the real one, counted from the rushed ceremony in the chapel, Cassian surprised her with a gift. This is every contract, every document, every paper related to our original arrangement, he said, handing her a thick folder. I'm giving them to you. You can burn them, keep them, do whatever you want. But I want you to know that as far as I'm concerned, none of it matters. What matters is what we've built since then. Liora took the folder to the library fireplace that night and burned it all, watched the papers curl and blacken and turn to ash, the evidence of a desperate bargain made by a girl who'd had no other choice. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that power wasn't given, it was taken, that belonging wasn't about birth, it was about what you built with the opportunities you created. 2 years after becoming a duchess, Liora stood in the market square again. But this time she wasn't defending herself. She was cutting a ribbon for the opening of the Thornhaven Community Center, a building funded entirely by estate profits and designed to provide education, job training, and support services to anyone who needed them. The crowd that gathered was massive, not just villagers, but people from across 3 counties. They came to see what the Common Duchess had built, what she'd accomplished. Lady Ashford spoke first, her voice still sharp despite her age. This building represents something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. True partnership between the aristocracy and the working class. Not charity, not condescension, partnership. And it exists because one young woman refused to accept that things had to stay the way they'd always been. Cassian spoke next. My wife has taught me that leadership isn't about maintaining tradition. It's about making sure tradition serves people instead of the other way around. This center is proof that change is possible, that one person, armed with courage and conviction, can transform an entire community. Then it was Liora's turn. She looked out at the faces watching her, young and old, rich and poor, skeptics and supporters, all mixed together. When I was asked to pretend to be a duchess 2 years ago, I was terrified, she began. I thought I'd fail, thought I'd prove everyone right who said I didn't belong. But I learned something. I learned that belonging isn't about where you start. It's about what you do with where you are. And I learned that the most powerful thing you can do is use whatever privilege you have to lift up people who don't have it. She gestured to the building behind her. This center belongs to all of you. It's not mine. It's not the estates. It's the communities. Use it. Build with it. Create opportunities for yourselves and your children. And when someone tells you that change is impossible, that you don't belong, that you should know your place, Remember that places aren't fixed. We create them, together. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, as the crowd explored the new building, Liora found her father sitting on a bench in the square. His health had stabilized, though he'd never be as strong as he'd once been. "I'm proud of you, little bird," he said, "more than I can say. I couldn't have done any of it without you, without the life you gave me, the values you taught me. I taught you to survive. You taught yourself to lead." He squeezed her hand. "That's all you." Mara appeared, now 17 and applying to universities across the kingdom. Tobin followed, nearly a man now, his carpenter's apprenticeship almost complete. They stood together, the Hale family, once drowning in poverty, now transformed by a chance that Liora had grabbed with both hands and refused to let go.
"Do you ever regret it?" Mara asked quietly. "Saying yes to the Duchess that day?" Liora thought about it, about the terror and the attacks and the constant pressure to prove herself, about the night she'd cried herself to sleep and the morning she'd wanted to run away. But she also thought about Cassian's smile, about the community center behind her, about the dozens of young people whose lives had changed because she'd changed hers. "No," she said, "I don't regret it, not for a second." That night, in the private quarters she shared with Cassian, Liora stood at the window looking out over the estate, the same view she'd had since the day she'd moved in. But everything looked different now. Cassian joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How much has changed. Any regrets?" "You asked me that once before. The answer's still no." She turned in his arms to face him. "But I do have news." What kind of news?" "The kind that means we're going to need to actually use that nursery we've been avoiding talking about." His eyes widened. "You're pregnant, about 3 months." The joy on his face was pure and unguarded. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her down carefully. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you." "A few weeks? You've been doing too much. The community center, the shop." "Cassian, I'm pregnant, not fragile, and I'm not stopping my work just because I'm having a baby." He laughed. "Of course you're not. Why did I think otherwise?" They stood together in the comfortable silence of people who knew each other completely, who'd fought together, built together, grown together. "What do you think our child will be?" Liora mused. "A duke? A duchess?" "I think they'll be whoever they choose to be, because we're going to raise them to know that titles matter less than character, that where you start matters less than what you build, that power is only worth having if you use it for something good." "Look at you, getting philosophical." "You've been a terrible influence on me." Kissed her forehead. "I love you. I love you too, even when you're being insufferable. Especially when I'm being insufferable." 5 years later, Liora stood in that same window, but the view had changed again. The grounds now included a garden specifically designed for the community center's children's programs. The village beyond had grown, new businesses sprouting up as the economy improved. And in the nursery down the hall, 2 children slept, a daughter named Eleanor who had her mother's determination and her father's steel-gray eyes, and a son named Thomas who would probably be trouble from the moment he could walk. The Duchess's reforms had spread beyond Thornhaven. Other estates were adopting similar programs. The Ladies' Council had launched initiatives supporting education for poor children across the kingdom. And in Parliament, new laws were being debated that would protect workers' rights and limit predatory lending practices. Liora had started a ripple that was becoming a wave. She'd never forgotten where she came from. The cottage with the leaking roof, the hunger, the fear, the feeling of being invisible. But she'd also never let it define her limits. She'd taken that experience and used it as fuel, as proof that people who'd been counted out could change the world if given half a chance. The woman who'd once entered this estate through the servants' gate now stood at its center. Not because she'd been born to it, not because she'd married into it, but because she'd claimed it, built it, earned it through every fight, every reform, every moment she'd refused to accept that things couldn't change. And in the end, that was the real transformation. Not from flower girl to duchess, but from someone who survived to someone who led. From someone who accepted her circumstances to someone who rewrote them.
Cassian found her there, as he often did, lost in thought as evening fell. "Come to bed," he said softly. "Tomorrow's another fight. Tonight, rest." In a moment, he joined her at the window, following her gaze out over the land they'd built together. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked. "Changed enough?" "No, but we've started something that will outlast us. That's all anyone can hope for." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Her partner, her ally, her love. Somewhere in Thornhaven, a young girl was probably lying awake in a cottage with a leaking roof, wondering if her life would ever be different, wondering if she'd always be invisible, wondering if change was possible. And in 5 years, or 10, or 20, maybe that girl would hear the story of the Duchess who'd once been just like her, who'd taken an impossible chance and turned it into something extraordinary. Maybe that girl would dare to hope, to fight, to believe that where you started didn't have to be where you ended. And maybe she'd be right. Liora smiled in the darkness and turned away from the window. There was work to do tomorrow. There always was. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, to be grateful, to recognize that the girl who'd delivered flowers through servant gates and the Duchess, who now commanded respect across the kingdom, were the same person. She'd just finally learned to see her own worth. And that, in the end, was the greatest transformation of all.